Imagine you were born in a spaceship, hurtling through the abyss, and you are told that your ancestors came from a planet, and that it is your duty to live out your days taking care of this ship so your descendants can settle another planet after you're dead. Except, what's a planet? It's like a big ball of dirt that spins around a star or something? But what's dirt? You mean that stuff in the greenhouse that's made of poo-poo? How much poo-poo would it take to make a planet? Planete? Imagine spending your entire life inside a fluorescently lit building with literally nothing outside, and with the same small group of people you've long since run out of things to talk about with. You can't even talk about the weather. How would you feel? For some of us, the feeling you are imagining is similar to the way we already feel about our actual life. It's not even sadness, is it? It's more just nothing. We're making a sandbox RPG called Spaceborne that will put you in that exact situation to explore just those feelings. Except right now the game is just a collection of very basic systems in a test room, and there's no feeling or exploring involved. How do we actually communicate nothingness through a game? I think it'll do a lot for our morale to put some work into the visuals and make this at least look like a game. Finding the right art style is important for every game. Visuals actually do most of the communicating of mechanics, but they also help establish a tone. And that tone of, isolation, nihilism, and general depression is a big reason for making this game in the first place. We want the player to feel like this ship and its inhabitants are as cold and uncaring as the abyss that surrounds it, like they are hopelessly divorced from nature. A mundane kind of horror where the biggest threat is the inescapable boredom of a life devoid of any mystique or meaning, surrounded by familiar faces, yet lonely. So realistic art style, right? Sounds just like real life. It makes sense if it looked like real life too. But speaking of realistic, there's no way I'm going to pull off a photorealistic art style. But there is an art style that has slowly become a part of our reality that's both legible and simple. You may not have ever noticed it, but you've seen it. This is probably the most famous pictogram in the world. Or is it a pictograph? I'm not quite sure. Technically it's just some colored sticks and two dots, but through a layer of abstraction it becomes two people. Put through another layer of abstraction and some cultural awareness, it's a man and a woman separated by a wall. Through one more layer, it somehow represents a toilet. Modern pictograms are part of intuitive design and aren't usually meant to be art. They're there to communicate important information without language or unnecessary detail. Most people don't really like them. They come across soulless and cold, but they are designed for clear communication, so aren't they perfect for communicating gameplay? And doesn't the coldness of them look just like how the tone of our game sounded? Pictograms are modern looking enough for the futuristic setting too. And no, I'm still not sure if it's pictogram or pictograph. Look at this 2D stick figure. Oh wait, this is a mock-up of what a character could look like I made in Blender. If you remove all light sources and set the ambient light to pure white so there's no shading, you can make any 3D scene look 2D even with perspective. Normally that's the opposite of what you want, but it's necessary for the look. Now we could just make all the characters billboard or 2D sprites, which would be way simpler, and you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between 2D elements and unshaded 3D elements anyways. But 3D lets us make each model once and add or change animations later, and we can also share generic animations between characters, I think. I don't know how this works. It's okay. Let's make a test animation for him, and then export him to Godot. Here there's a setting in Godot to keep animations as separate files when you import them. And now we make another stick figure with different proportions, copy over the same bone layout from the other guy, but shift it around to match the new one. Then try exporting it to Godot. Can we assign the test animation? Okay, let's try to play it now. Well, the bones all have the same names, but here at the top layer, the animation says Armature, but the name of the skeleton in the scene is Armature001. Changing it didn't work. Let's just make sure all the object names line up in Blender, then export. Assign the test animation and... Yep! Baby, yeah! This is all gonna work.
Several days later.
None of this is gonna work. I made this walk animation and then I realized I couldn't export just an animation file by itself without re-exporting the entire rig. What I want to do is make our models first and make the different animations later and import them all separately, since we won't know until the end what all animations we'll even need. But Blender says no. There doesn't even seem to be a file type for just motion data. Also, I tried to change the name of one of the animations in Godot and it broke everything. I blew a few days trying different permutations of export and import settings in Blender and Godot. Every time I thought it was working, one of the animations inexplicably stopped working. What I think we can do that seems to work is have one base rig and only ever make animations with that in Blender so things don't get confused. And every time we make a new animation, we'll just have to re-export the entire rig with all of its animations. And the other character rigs will be able to use those animations. We just need to be careful not to accidentally re-export any of the animations with the other models because Godot will have a stroke. Before we go on, can I just say, Blender is the problem with this art style is there's no sense of depth, especially with just flat colors on the materials. You can't tell where his torso ends and his arm begins as it passes in front. Now, flat colored pictograms usually just avoid drawing characters and poses where they overlap themselves. But when they do, they use negative space to create these internal outlines. We'll call it an inline, but we can also call it a job for a shader. If you just look up how to make an outline shader in Godot, most of your results will involve putting a secondary material on each object you want to have an outline, then making that secondary material render behind but larger than the main material. At the edges of the object, the secondary material will poke out from behind, creating your outline. But I would rather this effect be done over the entire screen procedurally, so we don't have to add the secondary material to everything. And also because it's an inline, so it only needs to happen where two overlapping things have the same color. So I figured out how to write a shader that can be assigned to an object, where it looks behind the object, comparing the color and distance to the camera of each pixel with that of its neighbors. If the average difference in distance to the camera between neighbors is above some threshold, and the average difference between their colors is below another threshold, then the pixel is filled in with white or black to contrast. Here we've put a plane mesh in front of our camera, and applied our inline shader to it to see it in game. This is pretty jank, but it's still cool. Or maybe I'm just systematically making this game as ugly as possible. I don't know. Tell me in the comments. Our edge detection doesn't seem to understand angled surfaces though. If we make the ground a flat color so it reacts, it becomes really distracting. As the angle of viewing a surface becomes shallower, parts of the surface that are increasingly further apart become neighbors on the screen. Eventually 2 points that are more than the distance threshold away from each other will be shown in neighboring pixels, so the entire surface gets filled in as one big edge. I literally have no solution for this. I think it looks kind of cool in these boxes though. I am imagining that the larger environmental assets will be mostly grayscale anyway, so as a quick fix we made the shader just skip pixels with no saturation. So I guess we did wind up just manually assigning which objects have inlines. Since we're bothering to make the game look pretty, we ought to redesign the menus too. This is an RPG and let's be real, you gotta spend a lot of time looking at these things. I usually don't even bother changing from the default font in my games. I know, I'm awful. Luckily Godot has a theme system where you design presets for how GUI elements look, and then you can plug different ones into GUI nodes and it'll automatically apply it. For the style I'm thinking of a minimalist modern look, which sounds strange to say because I actually don't like that aesthetic too much, but it will go well with the pictograph thing, which is more important than personal preference. We got a new font from one of those free font websites that I think matches the vibe we're going for better. But in the process of seeing the name of this game written in a bunch of fonts to try them out, well, you can't unsee it. I'm no graphic designer, but even I can tell I'm no graphic designer. Initially I was thinking to do garish bright colors for the menu elements, and then have the game world be a little washed out so you can tell them apart. But it just wasn't working. It wasn't even minimalist either. To be honest, I chose modern minimalism semi-ironically, but I think with this aesthetic we have to earnestly try to follow its design principles, or else it won't work. The problem is, even if we change the color scheme and round a few corners, the layout of the menus themselves still aren't minimalist or modern. Look at this pause menu that's both a character sheet and an options menu at the same time. Just on this one screen we have your skills, personality traits, status effects, items, actions, quick game, and an empty spot for a character portrait. The modern minimalist would hide everything from the start and then have different submenus expand when you hover the mouse over them or something like that. But changing the layout completely would be a lot of work, and I made the menus this way on purpose. I like just having everything in one place and not having to navigate through submenus, getting the feeling this won't be the last time my intuitions clash with this aesthetic. Here's a second attempt at the theme. This time we were more careful about about the use of colors. A big part of minimalism is drawing the eye to what's actually important and not distracting people. So I committed to only using non-grayscale for things that are interactable or really important. And we only have a handful of colors we use. The reality is we'll probably redesign everything several times before launch, but art direction is an iterative process that's best started early. It also will help us stay on track tonally if the visuals already invoke the feeling we're going for. Unfortunately, I've been feeling the vibe of this game a little too hard lately, and by that I mean I'm depressed and unmotivated. Part of it is just that menu designing is boring. There's also some standard issue existential dread involved. The funny thing is, every time I remember that that's actually what this game is about, I become more excited about it again. Psychology, am I right? The modeling animation systems we've done so far were just to test the water, but we've yet to delve into the deep swamps of actually implementing animations. This is a first-person game, and I know people always say you have to have enormous floating hands and no body for first person to look good, but I just want to see what it looks like to lock the camera to the model's head with the regular animations. In Godot, there's a node type called a bone attachment where you can assign a bone from a rig to it and it will be locked to that bone. Here we've added a camera as a child of the bone attachment and it's linked to the head bone of the rig, and we're having the player move their head around. It works, but also this highlights the fact that we might want to control the camera separately. Let's go back to Blender and add a bone that will be just for the camera placement, animating its movement. Here the camera is following it. The motion is better, but we can see inside our own head. Adjusting the camera's clipping range doesn't work when the head moves, so we made a new model for the player, but we've kept the head and body separate so we can toggle the head's visibility. Good to still have a head in case we decide to add third person or a vanity camera. Then we made actual animations for basic movement, stun, the prone status effect, and each ability we have so far. I always put off and loathe implementing animations. Imagine that's going to be really hard and boring. And when it comes to setting up animation trees and stuff, I keep finding myself watching the same tutorials as the last time I tried to learn it once and for all, only to find that it's never as complicated as I remember. Because of the way we set up characters with a base actor class that runs everything and NPCs and players just having different decision-making functions, we can have one animation tree setup thing, making its own scene that can be instanced into any actor node that has a properly boned model. And then we can put all the code required to run it in the base actor class. First we implemented the movement animations. Then we spent a day fucking with this inexplicable bug with the falling prone animation. Here it's playing in slow motion so you can see it better. You see how clear the epilepsy is when it lasts longer? When a character has the prone status set on them, they immediately rotate 90 degrees to lie on their back, and the animation just begins rotated 90 degrees in the other direction and falls back straight to realign with the game object at the end of the animation. But for some reason, if you try to look down while this happens, it freaks the fuck out. I dug into it and I found out that the camera's global rotation signum is flipping every frame. But why? That's one secret? We'll never know. There's no real resolution to this tangent. I just stumbled upon a way of writing the camera controls that fixes it. It involves making it follow the camera bone's rotation more precisely, which reintroduces a I'm gonna have to fix the animations. While we were at it, we added a bone to the base rig to animate any item that a character might be holding, in the same vein as the camera bone from earlier. So for these knife animations, you can imagine putting a knife model on that bone there. Okay, I re-exported everything to Godot and set it up to play in an abilities animations when you use it. Let me just show you. Shit! Why did I put the quit button there? Okay, they don't seem to be playing, but actually the animations are just too slow. Each ability has its own duration, and they're subject to change, so I don't really want to manually make the animations match. But luckily we can use some simple math to determine what speed the animation needs to play at to align. Fucking hell! But here stupid typo. This should work now. Nope! Now it'll work. Oh, what do you know? It was working all of a sudden. Ha ha ha. You can take back what you said about my mom. I'll kill you! I just made a pretty model for the knife item that we have. So now we can put another bone attachment node in each actor for their held item. And where we're handling animation logic, we got some shit sorted out. So if you equip an action that comes from an item, the item's model will appear in your hand. Die! Sing, 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 sing. That's most of the visuals done for now. We have a first pass of the UI design, an art style locked in for better or worse, and an animation system and pipeline laid out all the way between Blender and some other place. Don't worry about it. If you look at the part of the active script that runs the animations, it rechecks a lot of things each frame that I'm sure are being checked somewhere else every frame, so technically it's inefficient. But in practice, the usability and readability benefits of having the animation logic in its own block I think outweighs the small cost of a few redundant if statements. I still don't like the animations workflow itself. Switching back and forth between Blender and Godot and re-exporting the entire base rig just to tweak one animation isn't conducive to iteration. I really wish I could have the animations, skeletons, and meshes all as their own independent things that could be exported then plugged into each other and just work. Or maybe if I could do the modeling and animations within a game engine, that would also reduce friction, but I'm not the one sitting down and making these programs, am I? As far as the style for the animations, I keep finding myself gravitating towards exaggerated motions, because these stick figures just can't emote very well. We'll see how this evolves and affects the overall vibe of the game. Audio often goes unnoticed, but affects so much of a game's feel. I must admit, I usually don't put any sound in my games at all though. I think I undervalue audio because growing up I always played games on computers with broken audio systems or on the TV late at night, so I would have to mute it. And originally I was thinking that if there's any game to not have music, it's probably Spaceborne, imagining the soundscape consisting of your lonely footsteps echoing through the halls and the constant humming of electronics and machinery. But game music is important to a lot of people, and I think establishing a musical vibe for the game early will be good for all the same reasons we established a visual vibe. You see, I accidentally got my hands on a handpan, and it sounds cool, and it's one of those instruments where you can just do random stuff and it will sound kind of like you know how to music, which makes it perfect for me. It also looks like a flying saucer. I mean, how can you not use it for the space game? We'll probably use music sparingly, but we at least should have something to play in the main menu and on the trailer. But I was thinking while we're at it, we can make some shorter chime thingies that will be played occasionally to emphasize story beats or moments of action. You know, like. But the problem is I can't music, so even if I stumble into something good through experimentation, I can't remember how to play it again. I could learn what the different notes of my handpan are and, you know, learn how to actually write music, but that sounds like a lot of work, and modern problems require modern solutions. There, that works I guess. I'm being real, I don't think this works. Well, just listen for yourself. And that's with editing together different takes. It just sounds so random and disconnected, and I can't for the life of me keep a consistent beat going. And I got no fucking clue if this matches the game's tone. Let's do what I always do when something gets tough and hide within the comfy walls of systems. Let's make a system for dynamically playing these musical cues, even if we need to replace the actual music itself later. Now the Mpc Ai in Spaceborne works by having a list of ideals which represent the character's motives for doing things, and this list can change dynamically. So when you attack an NPC, the event gets recorded, and after some arbitrary amount of time, the event gets resolved into either a hate or fear ideal directed at the player. So for starts, we can give each ideal a tune that will play when it gets added to an NPC's ideals list. For playing the tunes, we need an audio stream node in the scene. So we made it as one central music manager that acts like a jukebox, with a first in, first out list of tunes to play in order, and any other system or object in the game machine can submit play requests, and the tunes will never play over each other. Just wait for the ideals to form. And now you can tell he hates us. Let's turn the NPC's aggression down, and now he runs away. And there, he's afraid. I don't know, it's functioning correctly, but the music cues seem really abrupt and out of place. The fact that it plays a minute after the actual event doesn't help, but that's just a quirk of how the AI works. Part of the out of place feeling is probably because there isn't any other sound effects or ambience yet, and maybe with better tunes it'll just be better in general. Or maybe this game just shouldn't have music at all. That would better communicate the lonely and cold narrative. I've lost all confidence in my decisions. It's like I can imagine exactly what I want this game to be in my head, but it's still so distant and blurry that I can't quite make out the details yet. The pictographic art style I know is bad, but I've grown fond of it, if for nothing else than annoying people. But what about auditory style? Is that a thing? What's the sound of Spaceborne? I guess it is hard to communicate nothing.